Okay, welcome and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mudit Mittal. I am a principal solution architect based out of Microsoft Redmond. And today I'm going to talk about data import export framework. Just an FYI, this is a repeat session from yesterday. So if any of you have attended yesterday's session, would appreciate if you give the seat to other guys who have not attended. Okay. So today I'll be talking about data import export framework, which we recently released in for R2, and I'll be demoing features for R2 as well as R3. So if there are people who are already using it, I'll still talk about some of the basic things for the guys who are new to the framework. But at the same time, I'll talk about the new features. So can we quickly see how many people are already using it? Okay, actually quite a lot of people. Okay, so it's good. You guys would get a recap, and at the same time you'll get new features. I'll try to have at least last 10 or 15 minutes for questions. Okay, so that we can talk about your queries as well. But in case if you are short of time, I'll be available outside of the room for questions. Okay. So quick disclaimer, standard stuff. This is R3. It's not released. It's confidential. So some of the features, the way they look now, might not be the same when R3 is getting released. DIXF, Data Import Export Framework. I know some people call it DIF, some people call it DMF, but that is the official acronym for it. Okay, it's a framework to import and export data for Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. Okay, we released it almost an year back, less than a year back. At that time, it was an add-on solution. What it meant was you can install R2 or AX 2012, and then on top of it, you can basically install the framework. And it used to install in FPK layer. So we have done a change in our direction. We have moved it to foundation layer. So that is valid since CU7. So if you are on R2, you can actually take the new bits and move your stuff to the foundation layer. And the same would continue with R3 and going forward with the future versions. Now, quick terms for the folks who are new, I'll be using throughout the demo: source, staging, and target. So let's talk about a simple import scenario. What is your source? Source is basically where you are getting data from. It could be a file, delimited file, like CSV, comma separated, semicolon separated, tab separated, or it could be a fixed width file, or it can be Excel file or an XML. So Excel and XML is new in R3 and CU7 version. Okay, in the prior release we did not have native support for Excel and XML. Okay, but the another source which we supported from day one was ODBC, which basically means you can pull data from external databases or external applications which have ODBC drivers available. Okay, and even Excel and Access was one of them. That is mainly source. Now next we talk about is target. Target is the actual entity for which you want to import data. Things like customers, vendors, journals. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what entity means and how do we envision it for future, okay, in terms of AX 2012. So before I go further with this, there is something which we have added with this framework, the concept of staging. Okay, it's an industry concept, but we never used it in AX. So how we are going to use this is we have couple of tables which we have created inside AX 2012. Okay, they are not used for production functionality. They are not used anywhere in the app other than the framework. Okay, so what those tables are used for, when we import the data from source to target, we do not directly get into target. We first get it in staging, and then we get from staging to target. Okay, and there are a lot of valid reasons why we do that, and I'm going to talk about that once we demo. Okay, what can the framework do? It can import entity data, it can export entity data, and then we added some new features like compare and copy data between companies. Okay, so let's say if you have like a gold company, or you have scenarios where your customer is going live in multiple phases, and every time you go to a different phase, you are adding a new legal entity. It's a very common scenario. Then usually what you do, you start from one company, you want to copy a couple of configuration and maybe a couple of master data stuff to another company. So we added a feature to support that. It's not exactly copy company. I've been stating that multiple times. Is very similar to copy company, but it works at the entity level rather than at the table level. So that is the main difference, and we'll get to know what that entity means. Okay. Another thing is copying entity data across different AX environments. So today I was in one of the MDM sessions, and there was a question there as well. So how do we copy data between production and test, or staging and production? So you could use data import export framework to move the data between different kind of AX environments. Okay. Now let's talk about what do I mean by entity, and what do we envision in terms of entity. Okay. Let's take an example of customer. In a real world scenario, what is customer? Basically something which has name, which has phone number, which has address and specific attributes like discount groups and those kind of things. Now if we talk about the physical schema in AX, if I ask a developer what is customer, he'll tell me cust table. That is what you'll tell me. Okay. But honestly, does that cust table has all the attributes related to customer? No. We did a great job of doing normalization in 2012, and I was actually part of it. We even removed things like name and address outside of the cust table. Now that said, there was good reasons to do that. Okay. But now if you look at the physical data model for customer, it'll end up into 10 to 15 tables. It'll be cust table, it'll be DIR party table, logistics postal address, logistics electronic address, and whatnot. But if I don't know AX, if you tell me about those tables, I think I will really think you're crazy. Okay. For me, customer is one entity which has bunch of attributes. Okay. That is what interests me. And that is what we want to introduce inside AX, concept of entity, where you talk about attributes within that entity, and you do not care about the physical schema. So how do we represent an entity in the framework is we introduced a concept of staging. Okay. Staging is nothing but set of tables which we created in AOT for entities. So every entity we created one staging table. Okay. And any attribute you think is valid for that entity, you can put it in that table. So it's highly denormalized flat representation of an entity. Okay. It's completely opposite to what we do in 2012. Okay. Instead of doing normalization, we try to do denormalization. Now you can always imagine your version of an entity. If you disagree with the standard version of an entity, if you have more attributes or if you have less attributes, you can always create your staging table. Okay. You had a question? Okay. 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 I'll actually say, let's hold on the questions for the demo. Okay. And I really want to kind of progress forward. While I would do the demo, some of your questions might get answered. Okay. Unless it is really blocking the understanding, you can definitely raise your hand and ask question. For otherwise, I would say hold on questions for the last. Okay. So now I was talking about the entity notion. So try to see what we are trying to do with it. We are using the same entity for import export. We'll use the same entity for data migration. We'll use the same concept for integrations. Okay. We'll be using the same concept for MDM. So if any one of you would have attended the morning session from master data management, everything what happens inside AX within MDM is nothing but data import export framework. Okay. Then things like copy and compare, the new features, and the another new addition is configuration. So for us, when we did our first releases, the kind of entities we did was main accounts, customer, vendors, and those kind of things. But what we realized, there was a good need of having configuration data, your parameters, functional parameters, your system configuration data, things like batch settings, functional configuration stuff, all that kind of stuff. For that, what we had to do is just to create bunch of configuration entities rather than redesign the complete system. Okay. I'll talk about those scenarios as well. before we kind of dig deep into the product, let's talk about high-level import flow. Okay, if you remember the terms, what we had was source. Source could be a file or database. Okay, in this example, let's take file. On the right side, I have Microsoft Dynamics AX, which would have these staging tables which we ship, and obviously you guys can also create them. And then we have target tables, things like cast table, win table, and the actual tables. Now, to move the data, what we'll do, first we'll move the data from source to staging. Okay, once the data is in staging, either you can just move it to target, or what usually people do, people validate that data. Okay, people would validate that data for foreign referential integrity stuff. Let's say if you're doing a customer, you want to check before you import customer, all the fields in that customer have master data related to it. Let's say the customer groups are there, the address components are there, all those kind of things. Because usually what happens in normal scenarios, you will do the import. Either the import would say you do not have a related table, or the import would pass and you won't see the data on the form because the related stuff is missing. So this gives you a way to kind of do validations and manual corrections as well. Okay, and the other common scenario which I've seen in integrations and migrations as well as import and export is you want to do data cleansing. Okay, traditionally people have been doing data cleansing outside of AX. They would have the staging database, but they would have it outside. So what it meant, you write bunch of direct SQL or .NET code where you basically try to either call AX logic or you try to replicate that same logic outside in SQL and .NET. Okay, there's nothing wrong in it, but obviously you get redundancy. You have limitations. You do not have everything what you have in AX. Okay, usually to do data cleansing and all, you need business logics. Okay, that is one of the reasons why we have staging inside AX rather than outside. Okay, a lot of people ask me, staging is usually outside of the production database. Why did you guys decide to put it inside the production database? This is one of the reasons because we wanted to make sure you can completely leverage the business logics. Okay. Now let's assume you have validated the data and it is all correct. The next step is to move the data to the target. Okay, and once the data is in target, you can open the forms and you can verify the data is correct. Now let's say even after that you get some errors. You miss something. Very common scenario. What people would say, let's restore to a clean state and re-execute everything. That's what most of the people do. Okay, but what our recommendation is, you do not have to re-execute the entire flow. You do not have to restore to a clean state. If you just want to update bunch of attributes, you can rerun the staging to target process. Okay, and what we support is incremental runs. We call it upsert. It basically means if the entity exists, it would be an update. If the entity does not exist, it would be an insert. Okay, when I say that, it sounds like a very simple thing. If you are from X++, it's like either call insert or update or call write method. Okay, but if you go into the back end of it, an entity is not one table in your target. It could be 20 tables, it could be 30 tables. To support an upsert model at the 20 table level is quite complex. But one of the good things is all these things would work with the new entities or the custom entities which you guys would create for yourself as well. Okay, so it's not limited to the framework and what we ship. Okay. The next thing I'm going to talk about briefly is the architecture related to data import export framework. So it's a 3-tier architecture, very similar to AX. You have client, you have AOS, you have SQL Server. Now the only thing which is changing is we have a service, data import export framework service on the SQL Server. Now why do we have that? For the import we use SSIS. It's SQL Server Integration Services. Okay, the reason for that is we wanted this thing to scale with volume. We don't want to deal like 100 or 1,000 records. We want to talk about millions of records. That's what you guys have in reality. Okay, so SSIS is known for those things. Okay, that is the reason to do the import into staging tables, we use the SQL Server Integration Services. Now to interact with SSIS, we have our own service Windows service which you can, kind of install either on the SQL Server box or any, box which has connection to the SQL Server. Usually the recommendation is to do it on the SQL Server box. Okay. Now let's look at a flow. So assuming you are doing an import of a file, you'll always do it from client. Okay. You'll send the request from client to AOS, and once the AOS has the request, AOS is the one which can talk to the service. Okay. Your client cannot directly talk to the service, and then service is the one which would call the SSIS to do the actual data insertion. Now, it might look very simple, but if you try to think about, what really happens in the background, at the client, you're basically trying to import a file. Okay, the actual import happens on the SQL Server box. Now your file is on a completely different box than, where the insertion is happening. So there is a lot of magic we do behind the scenes to make sure, your file is transported from the client to the service box, which is completely abstracted from you. Okay, there are a lot of similar things what we do from the SSIS point of view. As you guys know, SSIS is not like an end user tool. It's more for developers and, technical guys. But we have tried to do, make sure that we abstract the technical portions of SSIS, and you do not have to go to SSIS for anything. We have screens in AX, which would let you do most of the stuff which we want from the SSIS. Okay. Now let's talk about entities. Out of the box, we ship, roughly 150 plus entities. These entities can be categorized into different kind of data. Master entity, things like customer, vendors, products, projects, employees. Okay. Then documents like sales orders, purchase orders, and those kind of things. Obviously, when I talk about documents, I'm not talking about transactions. I know a lot of people always ask me, like when you say sales orders, do you mean invoices, or you mean open sales orders? So here we are only talking about open documents. We are not talking about closed transactions. Okay. Just to be clear, technically it is possible to import anything. Okay, you guys can decide to import transactions as well. But as Microsoft, will never recommend you to import transactions from the backend. What we would recommend is you get the orders and you do the posting, and the transactions would get generated. Okay. Then things like journals, opening balances, inventory balances, ledger balances, those kind of things. And then parameters. This is new what we added. Each of the module has those parameters which you use for configuration. That's a very common thing, which you copy, or you slightly introduce variations when you move between environments, or you move between companies. So we added bunch of entities for that. Then static data like units and dimensions, which does not change once you kind of like do the setup. You want to import that set of data. Things like configuration data. So one of the other requirements which as a technical guy I've seen a lot of times is we have a test environment. The bug repros on that test environment. But now I want to give my developer the same database to repro. Okay. Once I restore the database, there are a bunch of things which break. He needs to reconfigure EP. He needs to reconfigure SSRS. AIF does not work. So what we did, we basically created entities for configuration, system configuration. Now what it means is you can keep the system configuration in templates. You can basically keep them in CSVs. You can keep them in Excel files. Once you restore the database, you can basically import those templates into a different database to get the same settings back. Okay. Again, it is not rocket science. It is whatever you need to move between environments, you just need to create entities for that. Okay. Quick overview of the system configuration data we added in this release. BI analysis services, project server integration, workflow, EP, document management, AIF, batch settings, number sequences, and pretty much everything what you can see in the system administration module. Now I'll quickly highlight over the key features. Most of them I'm going to demo. Okay. But I'll talk a little bit about them so that you have an idea when I try to demo them. First thing is, we have different entity types. We have, a a simple entity, we have a flat table entity, and we have a composite entity. I'll kind of, when I demo, I'll show the difference between those entities. Then we have different sources, which I actually talked in the term slide. I talked about file and I talked about ODBC. But if you look at the slide, I have something else also, AX. Okay. So what it means, you cannot just use the framework to do the import. You can also do the export. You can take the data from AX and you can move it to a file. Okay. It's completely reverse process. So import was source to staging, staging to target. This is going to be target to staging, staging to source. So it's quite interesting if you think, without doing additional effort, whatever you created for import, it works for the export as well. Okay. Then we have folder support. It's a very common requirement which a lot of customers requested is if you think about integration, most of the customers have this requirement where you get set of files dropped in a particular folder. Okay, and you want to periodically import those files without manual intervention. Okay, so we added a batch process for that. What it does, you can specify the folder and all the files in that folder. We would import it automatically one by one, and as the file moves, as the state of the process changes, it'll move it to a different folder. Something like, let's say, once we pick up the file for import, we'll move it from the source folder to an in-process folder. Okay. As soon as we complete the process, we'll move it from in-process to a completed folder. And in any case, if there is an error, we'll move it to an error folder. So very common requirement, what people have. So just wanted to highlight, if you have those requirements, you do not have to customize, out of the box. Those things are supported. Then, one of the things is very good in the tool is extremely configurable. The format of the file you have. You do not have to hard code the column names. You do not have to hard code the separators. Okay, everything is configurable. What it means, if out of the box templates do not match, you have a way to do mapping between your source to staging and staging to target using a user-friendly mapper control. Then all the code which we have in the framework is completely server-side. We have a service interface. What it means, usually what people do, people use a pull mechanism for integrations. You'll run a AX batch job which would pull the files from a folder, or you'll pull it from a database. But with the complete service interface, what it means, we have exposed WCF services for whatever we do in the data import export framework, which basically means you can even call the interface from outside applications. So if you have a third-party system and you basically want to push data from that system to AX, you do not have to trigger it from AX, you can trigger it from the third-party system as well. Okay? It's extremely powerful if you think about mobile devices, tablets, and all kind of that stuff where you want to kind of move data. And the next thing is it is completely enterprise data aware. There were a bunch of questions in MDM session also about that. It kind of relates back. So with 2012 we have concepts like product, party, which are not really legal entity specific, they are global and enterprise in nature. Okay, we do have support for all that kind of stuff, and I'll show you with the examples how we handle the enterprise data. Then one of the things which we usually used to get, I have million transactions, it's great that you use SSIS to kind of import them, but SSIS is only used till staging. Okay, post staging I have business logic. Even out of the box you say you have customized, you have optimized code, but when I add my code, I want to calculate balances. Okay, I want to do complex calculations, and if I have millions of record, it gets slow. It takes me 12 hours to do it. What should I do? So what we did, we introduced out-of-box support for task bundling. What task bundling means, if you have, let's say, millions of records, that is your entire load. We divide your load into multiple bundles. Let's say, if you decide 10 tasks, we'll divide it into 10 equal bundles, and we'll execute those 10 bundles in parallel. Okay, so what it means is theoretically your time would reduce at least by 1/10 in that particular scenario. We have seen actually great success depending upon how you configure your batch server. You can really make it scale very good. And I know there are a lot of people who are using the framework who are unaware about that setting. So a lot of times I get emails, it's taking, half an hour to just do, 1,000 products. Is there any way, I can make it perform better? So those are, few small tricks which you can use to kind of make it perform better. Then, out of the box, we ship with 150 entities, but, you guys have your own scenarios. You guys might not be using those entities, or you might want, you have completely custom entities. So what we do to help you on that, we actually ship with a custom entity wizard. It helps you to create new entities, okay? So depending upon your data model, either it can do your 100% of the entity, or it would do 60% or 80% of your work, okay? It really depends on the data model, okay? But that said, we have detailed guidance on TechNet without using the wizard how you can manually create the entity. So you can always fall back to that and use the combination of custom entity wizard and that documentation to create entities. And I know there are a lot of partners who are running all kind of different blogs to tell how to do those things. Okay, so you can always even look in the documentations and blogs as well. Then I talked about incremental runs already. I'm going to demo compare and copy, and then there is a new addition in this release, role-based security and privacy. So during the first release, when we did this, I got a feedback from partner. It said, great, but I have a problem. Either I have user has access to all the entities, or they have access to nothing. Okay, I want to basically, my data is sensitive. I do not want them to use all the entities. It depends on the role. Let's say if I, one of the HR managers, I can import employees, I can export employees. But if I'm a sales clerk and I'm using the framework, I should not be able to touch employees. Okay, so we added support, using XDS and role-based security, so that you can secure using, secure entities as well as processing groups through XDS. Okay. Then there are small things like number sequences, default values, key conversions, which you require when you move data between different different systems. I'll kind of demo a few of them. Okay, I'm going to move to demo now, and rest of the time we'll spend looking at those scenarios. Okay. Yeah, quick question. Okay. A very interesting thing, I've been getting it from day one. As soon as I said we supported upsert, now the next question was, can we delete? Okay, can we do cleanups? At Microsoft, intentionally we do not want to kind of support automated deletes. Okay, because I don't want someone to sue us saying you deleted our transactions and we didn't want to delete it. Okay, so. But however, there is an easy way to see what you imported. So I'll show you an UI which would tell you how you can go from the staging to target and find the exact record. In that scenario, you can definitely customize it to do the delete yourself, or you can do it from the UI. But honestly, you're not the only one who is asking for it. Often I get questions about that. Okay. Okay, so this is R3, and it is with our demo data. So there is a new module which we have added for data import export framework. At the bottom you see MDM stuff, quick recap. MDM also uses the same thing. So these parameters are specific to MDM. And then there is another interesting thing is RMS. So I'm not sure how many of you know about RMS. RMS is an Microsoft retail product. Okay, so this is one of the things our retail team has done. They wanted to support out-of-the-box data migration for RMS to AX 2012. So what they do for you is, if you want to migrate someone from RMS to AX, they have shipped all the entities and predefined queries using ODBC. So you do not have to do any custom mappings or so. Out of the box, data can be migrated from RMS to AX. Honestly, I don't know the detail of the versions, but if you're interested, definitely I'll kind of drop off my email or the retail folks, and I can get you details for that. Okay. So that was, the things which are developed on top of the framework. Now let's talk about the framework. So one of the things, I'll first show you is the data import export framework parameters. So these are basically settings, you don't have to really change much in this. So the kind of stuff which you see at the bottom, data access mode, insert commit size, these are some default settings which we use for SSIS. These have been, tested for optimizations. The only reason we provide those settings is for some advanced users. If you want to kind of do something, different, you can change them. But the key setting here is shared working directory. Okay, shared working directory is a path which we use in the backend. Okay, an end user doesn't get to see this, doesn't get to access that. This is a path, network path, which your AOS user should have access to, and the data import export framework service would have access to. So basically what happens is when you try to do an import, we move the file which you're trying to import from the client to this folder. Okay, it might look simple, but there is a lot of other things which happen when we do that move. Okay, and it is from this folder the service would pick the file and do the execution. Okay, so for functional users, you just need to set up a network path which is on your SQL Server box, where your AOS user has access to it and your service user has access to it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So very good question. This is a very common mistake which you even see in my application. People tend to usually specify a local path. The local path works just because I'm doing one box installation. But for all practical scenarios, you'll never have one box installations in production or even your test environments. Okay. So recommendation is to specify a network path. And then we have a nice little validate functionality. If you specify something wrong and if you do not configure the security for the folder correctly, we'll give you an error message there. Okay. Then there are a bunch of other parameters which I'll talk about later. Now, the first thing which we want to talk about is source data format. Okay. So let's take a simple scenario of import. Okay. If you want to import, the first thing you want to know is what is the format of your file, whether it is a CSV, whether it is tab separated, what are the attributes of the file. So you can create a source format here, the different types. I'm going to talk about type file, a bunch of properties related to it. The first property is whether the file is delimited, things like comma separated, tab separated. It is fixed width meaning if you guys do integrations with old systems wherein the file does not have any separator, but it says first 10 characters is account number, next 2 characters is customer group, that kind of stuff. Very common if you do data migration and integrations with old systems. Okay, and then we support XML and Excel as well. So for the first demo, I'll use delimited. Okay, I'll use a comma separated file format. For that, I specified the row delimiter to carriage return line feed, basically CRLF. There are a bunch of other options available, and then for the column delimiter, I specified comma. If anyone in the room has SSIS experience, these are the same options which you would see in SSIS, and obviously the reason for that is we are using SSIS in the backend. Okay. Then there are things like text qualifier, code page. Now let me talk about the regional settings. They are pretty interesting when you talk about different regions. Things like if you have Chinese character set in your file, do you want your file to be Unicode or you use a different character encoding for your file? All those things you can do using the code page option. Okay. Then the other interesting thing about the regional settings is things like decimal separators. If you are in Europe, in some regions you will use a comma, but if you are in US, you would use dot. Now other things, the date formats changes from region to region. US is mostly MMDDYY, but if you go to Asia or Europe, it's DDMMYY. Okay, so these are a bunch of things. Usually traditionally when we used to do stuff, we used to hard code it in code. Okay, we used to assume either we hardcode in code or we used to pull it from the regional settings. Okay, but usually what would happen, though you are in US, but you might get a file from Europe. Okay, you might be doing an integration and your bank is in Europe or your customer is in Europe who's giving your file. Now, just to import a particular file, you are not going to change your regional settings. Okay, what basically meant was those things are attributes of your source rather than your system. So that is why we let you specify locale and all those things in the regional settings here. So independent of your system, you can override those settings. Okay. Then there are application specific settings like dimensions. If we talk about 2012, we did a lot of changes and dimensions was one of them. You guys wanted unlimited dimensions without development. So here you get it. Okay. So you get that with some cost. You guys know, like the data model is complex. Okay. Earlier it used to be a string field, array of string fields. Now it's no longer a string field, it's a rec ID. It's basically a 64-bit integer. Now, when you try to do import export, you do not want to deal with those 64-bit rec IDs, okay? Because they change depending upon the system. Now, what we have done, we have provided a way that you can specify your dimension structure here, your dimension format, instead of specifying the 64-bit rec ID. So let's say if you want to do a business unit, cost center, department, you can choose the dimensions which you expect in the file, and you can specify a delimiter, the chart of account delimiter, and then you specify a format in which you expect the file would have default dimensions. Like in this case, if you have the dimension combination in the file, it would be of the format business unit hyphen cost center hyphen department, rather than the 64-bit integer. Okay. Okay. So very good question. Couple of things. If you notice here, why do we take those attributes at the source format level, where we have not even specified the file yet? So if you look at this, just specifying the type of file is not telling you what file it is. The actual file is still not in picture. I'll hold on to the processing group because a couple of folks won't know about it. But one of the reasons why we have it at the source format level is so that you can reuse it with different files. Let's say your default dimension structure is same between customers and vendors. Okay. Now, if you put it at the file level, you have to repeat that stuff. If you have a customer CSV file and a vendor CSV file, you can reuse the same source format. Okay. If I put it at a lower, if I put it at a basically higher level, what it means is you would have to replicate those settings for every import. So we wanted to avoid those scenarios. That's why we brought it at a little lower level at the source format. Okay.
Will this serve then as a functional code?
Will that serve that as a?
When you're, let's say, exporting entities to like service-oriented platforms, you always do it on functional code. This will serve it as functional code, or do you have to compose that as mapping?
This is something I'll talk about code transformations. How this thing would get translated, in import and export. So I'll hold on that question for that time, because at the moment you are just specifying what is in your file. You are not specifying what it means. You are not specifying which field it would go. Okay, so all those things are not really there at the moment. Okay, so let's assume we have specified the format of the file. Okay, now the next thing is entities. We talked about that. This basically specified the list of entities which we ship out of the box. Okay, so it's a huge list, and I know still I hear from partners they want more. So if you guys are following our release schedule, we have been aggressively releasing updates. So every 3 or 4 months you'll see a new version wherein you get more and more entities. I remember when we did the first release, we had 20 entities or so, and every release we have at least doubled what we had. So we went from 20 to 60, 60 to 80, and now we are more than 150. Okay. Now there are a couple of things which are interesting from entity point of view. Let's pick up customer, the most commonly used one. Okay. So if you look at it, there are 3 things which I want to kind of emphasize for an entity. First is this staging table. Okay, as I said, this is like a highly denormalized flat representation of an entity. What it means, there is a table on AOT called DMF customer entity, which would have all the attributes related to customer. Okay. Then there is something called entity class, which we call business entity class. So, irrespective of how much I can tell you, like you can do mappings, it's completely configurable. At the end of the day, when you talk about ERP, business logic is involved. There is no way you can say field 1 is equal to field 2 every time. There would always be, requirement of, calculating amounts or looking up external stuff and, translating stuff. So for those reasons, wherever you need code transformations, we have a nice little business entity class. There you can write your code transformations. Again, if you do not have any code transformations, you can have the class empty without, adding any code transformations. But most of the scenarios, I'll tell you, you'll have code transformations. Now, the next thing is the target entity. Now, till now, what we talked about source, we talked about staging, but where is the real entity? The real entity is in target. Okay, so you have to specify what all tables in target you want to impact. Okay, what all fields you want to impact. So the target entity structure is defined using a query in AOT. So what you see, this DMF customer target entity, it's a physical query in the query node inside AOT. Okay, and you can put all the data sources which are related to this entity. Okay, there is a lot more to talk about this entity form, and I'll kind of hold it. I'll show you an end-to-end flow, and once you guys get used to all kind of mappings, we'll come back to this and talk in detail what advanced stuff you can do here. Okay. Which ones? Yeah. So what happens is the bunch of entities which we ship out of the box. Okay. So what you see here is this column is basically nothing but the default value for that entity. Okay. So if you create a new one, you would not get this. Okay. This is the string name for the entity, and this is the enum to default that. So let me quickly show you that what it means. Okay. So this is the out of the box entities which we ship. So if you want to create a different version of an existing entity, you can use the enum for defaulting. But the actual entity name is this one. Okay, is the string one. Okay. Now we talked about entities, we talked about data format. Now how do we import it? Okay. So let's talk about something called processing group. Processing group is nothing but combination of entities which you want to import together. Let's say you want to do customer and customer addresses together, or you want to do customer and customer groups together. Okay. For the demo purpose, I've created a bunch of processing groups. Let's start with customer. Okay. So when you come in this, you can add an entity. This is the same list which I've shown you on the target entity form. Okay. After you select the entity, you have to specify the format. This is the same format which we created initially, CSV. Okay. So I'm going to delete this and stay with the current one. Okay. Now you have defined the format. You have defined that you want to pull in data into customer. Now you need the file to do the import. So here we have a sample file to do the import. Let's try to open this in Notepad. Okay. So if you look at the file, the first row in the file has information about the columns. Okay. It's talking about the first column is credit mark, second is account statement, third is name, fourth is account name and all. Okay. If you guys are familiar with the AX field names, they almost match with the AX field names. Okay. But it is not necessary that it should be exactly the same names. It is up to you. You can choose any name you want. Okay. I'll show how those field names are used. So now, if you look at this, this one has 5 rows. Basically, those are 5 customers. Okay. All the columns are separated by comma. Obviously, because we are using the CSV file format, and we said the column delimiter is comma. Okay. Now, The first step, remember, is to get the data into staging. Okay? To get the data into staging, you have to import the data from file to staging. Now, your column names and sequence in file may not be the same in staging. So what do you need to do? You need to map the columns in staging, source to staging. Okay? And these are the column names which you would use to identify and map to staging. So let me just do generate source mapping. This is an out of the box functionality we have. What it does, it would read those column names in the file, and it would read all the columns in the staging table, and it would try to do a name match. If there's a perfect match or a partial match, it would auto map them. Okay? Now that said, sometimes you would get like a 100% match, sometimes you might not get a match. So in the scenarios where it does not auto map, you can always modify it. Okay? So let me show you how you modify. You can go in modify source mapping, and here you will see a nice little WPF control which we kind of like host inside AX. On the left side you have source. This is basically the columns which you see in the file. Okay? And on the right side you have the staging table. These are the fields in that flat table for the entity. Okay? Now you can basically hover over these fields, and you can get the standard label and help text which you have in AOT, and the data type which you can use for mapping. Now let's say if the mapping was not correct, you can basically select the connectors, you can delete them, you can basically reconnect them using the mapper control. Now a lot of people tell me this looks very similar to BizTalk. Okay? It's not the same control, but obviously it is similar look and feel. Okay? And usually when I show this, people say, you're missing those functoids in what you have in BizTalk. So I'm going to show that as well. Okay, just wait for that. So I'm going to save this mapping, and for some of the guys who are developers or who are too technical, we have the old grid view. Same thing in the grid. You have the source column and you have the staging column. Okay. Some people like the mapper control, some people like the grid view. Okay. Yeah. Now you cannot use the column number for mapping. You have to use the column name. Yeah. So actually a very good question which I've seen practically a lot of people have. So his question is, like, okay, you know how to map. You know what the first column is. You know what the second column is. But when I'm getting a file from a third party, he's not giving me that row. Basically, in this particular file, I don't have the first row. You basically don't have this row. Okay. So what happens is, at this moment, we are using a sample file. It's not the actual file. Okay. If you look at this, this is a sample file. So what I would recommend, create a sample file with these columns, do the mapping, and when you do the actual import, you can skip that row. Okay. So there was one of the properties in the source format which said whether your first row is header or not. Okay. And there are a bunch of advanced stuff which says skip rows. That's another requirement. What people say, I've done the mapping. When I get a file from third party, they have some extra rows in the front. They usually add summary header to the file which says it would have number of records, or when it was generated and all those kind of things. So what people used to do in past, they used to kind of like have some other program which would process the file, remove those lines, and then it would kind of import. But what we allow is, we allow an option of using skip rows. So you can say how many rows are not really your data and you want to skip. Okay. 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 So his question is, let's say for the first file I have account num in the first column. In the second file I have it in the second column. What happens? Does the system is intelligent enough to know? Honestly, the system is dumb. Okay. System doesn't know what account num means. Okay. We have not hard coded any of the names. So when you do the mapping, you are specifying your intent. So if you look at that control again, here you are saying account num equal to account num. if you call it XYZ or foo equal to account num, system would assume, foo is account num. Okay? No. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So, yeah. 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 So what we do in the backend is, we save the sequence, we save the column names and bunch of things, and I'll tell you how we use it when we actually execute it. Okay. So we do a lot of magic behind the scenes. The guys who use SSIS can tell you, what we are doing. Okay. Let me kind of. Okay. So I have generated the mapping, assuming all is good. I'm going to do a preview of this file using preview source file. I want to do a preview to make sure that it's all correct. Now, obviously, I get an error. It's not unplanned. It's part of the demo. So it said there was one error. I'm going to kind of close that for now. If you look at the preview grid, here you can see the file, the lines which were in the file. Okay. This is the .NET grid control. It's not standard AX grid control. We are showing you the information without actually inserting the data into staging table. Now, what happens behind the scenes? We take the file from the client, we move it to the server. From the server, we move it to that working share. We use the mapping what you have. On basis of the mapping and the file, we dynamically generate the SSIS package. The service is executing that SSIS package on the SQL server. It gets the result back, gets the result to the data grid control which we have, and then we show it to you. So there is like humongous amount of things happening in the backend which you don't get to see. Okay, and obviously that is the intent. We want to make it completely seamless and abstracted, and we want to even get our non-technical users to use it. Now let's look at what error it was. One of the lines was errored out. For that, what you could do, preview error details. You can look in the staging log details. It's telling me for a column credit max, there is an error code, 107 something something. This is an error code. You can look at MSDN, and this is the description which you would get in MSDN. It says the data value violates integrity constraints. Quite technical, Definitely, as a technical guy, I can tell you something went wrong with that column. Okay. It's a very common stuff. When you do import, your source system would always give you a file where 1 or 2 rows are bad. So what usually happens traditionally, we reject the entire file. Okay, and we'll spend days and nights to figure out, out of those million rows, which is the row which is bad. Okay, till then we cannot do the import. Okay, now we wanted to change that behavior. We gave an option to bypass that line. So if you look back at the file, so there were these like 5 rows, out of which this is the row which we skipped. Okay, and if you look at the file, the first column is obviously credit max, and the value which I've used is alphanumeric, but the column type is numeric. That is the reason it gave that integrity constraint issue. Now the real question is, we know about the column, but we don't know about the row. Okay, we could have given you the row number. You open the file and open that row in in your big file, but we decided something else. Okay, we gave an option to find all the rows which errored out. So you can just press view error file, and you will actually get all the lines which errored out. In this particular case, it was a single line, but if there are multiple lines, all those lines would have been here. Okay. It's a cool feature. It's configurable. You can decide whether you want to turn the bypassing of errors on or off. You can go either ways. I'll quickly take the question. Yeah.
If there's an error, can you block the entire queue?
Yeah.
So that you not only have the message, but other incoming messages as well, that those are completely blocked if you
Okay.
import this sequence.
Okay, I'll repeat the question. He's saying, if the import fails, can you block the entire queue? Okay, so definitely there is a parameter to say, if this one fails, you can make the entire load fail. Okay. Now that said, if you have parallel loads happening, you would have to create your own dependencies using the bash system to make sure the related stuff also fails. Okay. So we have done the preview. Now let's quickly load the data into staging table. Now this is the first step. Okay, obviously we got that one error we don't care about. If you want to look at what that error, if you want to look at what data was inserted, you can go in execution history. Here you would see the staging status ended. You can look at the number of records, how much time it took. And then if you want to go to look at the actual data, you can go in view staging data. Okay, here you can see the 4 rows which were imported. Now here you can do validations, which we provide a manual way to do it. In this case, it's saying the zip code is incorrect. You can go to the zip code and fix it. Yep.
What if somebody else is running the same file, or it's the similar file at the same time?
Okay. So the question was, if somebody else is running the same process or same file, they are using the same staging table, what happens? So what technically happens, every time you do get staging, we give you a new job ID. So we differentiate between runs. Okay. So now let's say everything is clean. If I wanted to manually fix the data, I could do it. If I wanted to run scripts, if I wanted to do data cleansing, I could do it all over here. Okay. Now this is all good. Now my actual intent was to get this data into target, not in staging. So the second step is copy data to target. Okay, I can run this thing. Here I would get number of records, number of tasks. This is the performance option, task bundling. I said, like at the moment by default we say number of tasks is 1. If you say 2, what you would see, it has changed the bundle size to 2. What it would mean, it would create 2 bundles of equal size and it would run them in parallel. Obviously with 4 records it's an overkill. So I'm going to go back to 1. Okay. There is something called task bundling. I would recommend you guys reading our performance blogs. So it has details about that. So it is on the same batch server. It would create multiple runtime tasks. Okay. So you can run this in batch and interactively as well. For the demo, obviously I'll run it in non-batch. So now what is happening is I have basically copied the data from staging to target. It says 4 records created, 0 updated. In case I would do it again, it would say 4 records updated rather than created. Okay, that's the upsert option. Now let's quickly see the staging data. I'll get a transfer status to see whether those were successfully done or there was an error, and I can press the target button, and I can see the customer was created, address was added, party was done, location, roles were created, everything happened in one shot. Okay. Looks simple, but a lot of things happen behind the scenes. Okay. For instance, if you talk about the product entity, I think they have 20 data sources in the backend. Okay. So if you wanted to do an update, let me quickly do that. Let's say I want to change the customer group from 20 to 10. I would change it in the staging table. Okay. I would mark this record. Okay. I would do copy data to target. Instead of running for all records, I would do criteria. I would say the rows which have been selected by user. Okay. So now instead of 4, I get 1, and I can rerun this thing. It says 1 record updated. This is extremely powerful even for your custom entities, because if you talk about data migration products or when you do initial data load, I know like most of the partners, once they hit one error, they start from step 1. They have to do the reload, they have to get the related entities, which is really a pain. Now you can fix the data manually using scripts or whatever you want, and then you can run the last step. Let's quickly verify if that worked. Press the target button again, and I see the customer group was changed to 10. And that is another way kind of tie up to the delete quotient. Now you have the UI, you can delete it directly. Now you know what you imported. Okay? Yeah. Okay. I think the similar question was raised in MDM. session. I'm not sure if it was from you. So how does it handle date effective records? So for each of the entities, there is a query behind. That is your target entity. So what we usually import is the current record. Okay, but if you want to customize it and if you want a different record, you are free to do those changes in X++. It's not something which is hard coded at the framework level. It's more at your in the X++ level where you can customize it depending upon your requirement. Yes, it'll always update the primary one. Okay. So that was the import. I would quickly like to show you the ODBC scenario, and then we'll move over export. So inside source data format, I have something called ODBC. Okay, you can basically create a DSN in your system, and you can refer it. In this case, it's a SQL Server database. I have called my legacy database on the same system. I have a similar processing group, customer ODBC. You can go in entities. Instead of specifying CSV, I have only specified the different data format. And here, instead of specifying a sample file, I specified a T-SQL query. Now, this is something what I was saying. If you're coming from external databases, you can do complex joins, you can do aggregations, you can do views, you can do anything what you could do in T-SQL. So earlier you had to go through multiple hops to get into AX. With this T-SQL support, you can directly get in one shot. You do not have to have multiple staging databases. Okay, let's quickly generate source mapping. Very similar experience. Instead of column from the file, it would execute the query, get the list of columns, and it would automatically map them depending upon the field name match. You can see in modify source mapping, similar behavior. Now, one of the things different here is I have very few columns on the source. I have country, region, customer group, language, and name, nothing else. Believe me, that is the most common scenario. I've dealt with so many partners, they would never have 100 columns. Every time, whether it's a file or external application, they would have minimum number of things. Things like account numbers would be missing. Things like currency would be missing. So let's see how we handle those scenarios. When I do preview in this case, it's complaining for two fields, currency and account num. It's saying those things are mandatory for AX and you cannot import. So how do we solve that problem? We can go in modify source mapping, the detailed grid view, and here we can add two rows for those columns. Let's say account num. Since I do not have a source field, I can say I want to auto generate it. What auto generate would do is it will pull it from number sequences. Okay, and then for currency, let's say my external application was very simple one, and it always had US records. So I would specify a default value using auto default, and I'll say USD here. Okay. Now once I preview, I get the account numbers as well as the currency. Okay, those are small things which help doing integrations where you do not have to write custom code for those kind of things. So let me quickly move on to export. So we talked about source to staging, staging to target. Let's do the complete opposite: target to staging, staging to file. Okay, so I have bunch of source data formats which I've defined. I have defined one for AX, which basically means my source is AX 2012, and then I have one for Excel. Okay, instead of delimited fixed width, I've chosen Excel. Then I have one for XML. Now, what I'm going to demo you is we'll export the list of customers in all kind of formats. Okay. Before we do that, let's quickly see the import for Excel and XML. Okay, I have a processing group for Excel. When I go in entities, I have exactly the same thing, but my source data format is Excel. Specify the Excel file. If you look at it, it's an XLSX file. I will do the same thing, generate source mapping. I would do the preview. same behavior. So irrespective of your source, you get the same mapping behavior, same execution. Now, similar stuff is true with XML. In this case, I've defined the source data format as XML. I have an XML file. Let me quickly show you that file. Okay, similar columns, everything same. And now I'll do the generate source mapping in that. Same behavior. Okay. Now, let's say I've defined the sources for import. Now I want to export the data. I have another processing group called customer AX. Can go in entities. Here the entity is customer, but the source data format is AX. Okay, instead of file or ODBC or XML, I have AX. Here I can press select and I can specify a criteria. Let's say I want to export particular customers or the customers which were created today, that kind of stuff. Okay. Now I'll do the exact same thing. I'll do get staging data. In this, I am pulling the data from target to staging. Complete opposite flow. So 36 records inserted in staging. You can go in execution history. You can do the same stuff. You can see all the data was exported into staging. Now, let's say you want to export it to file. What you could do, you could use the option export to file. You can specify the job for which you are exporting. Then here you can specify the target format. Okay, let's say you have defined the formats for import. Remember, for import we created 3 formats: CSV, Excel, XML. So we are going to reuse those formats which we created in import. So let's say I want it in CSV format. I'll choose CSV here. It's going to desktop. Let me quickly clean the files from the desktop. Okay. Okay, I don't have that file. Going to run it, and the data was exported in this format. Okay, again this is not a hard coded format. If you remember the earlier file, credit max was the first column. Okay, the reason it is like this because the target processing group I chose was the one which I selected for import. Now this again uses SSIS. So imagine the power of the export which you would get in SSIS is extremely different from doing it with custom X++ scripts. I'll hold on for the questions till the demo because we are really running short of time. Okay. Now the next thing is, let's say you want to export this instead of CSV, you want to export it to Excel. We'll choose the Excel format here. We'll run it. And then the data was exported into XLS. Okay. Now let's try the last one, XML. Here I need to specify a root element. Let me quickly do that. Okay. So it's on the desktop. Okay. So if you look at it, one of the key learnings is you do not recode depending upon your format. You do the same mapping, you do the same export or import, and you can basically try, assume the format is the last stuff rather than the first stuff. This is very different from the way we have been doing because we have been concentrating too much on the source format rather than the actual logic. Now we want you guys to move away from the source format and only concentrate on the the actual business logic. Now in the last 7 minutes I quickly want to demo a new feature called compare copy. There is something called compare entity data between companies. This is the stuff which I said, you have a gold company or you have a template company, you want to roll another phase and you want to copy data, or you want to compare and copy data between new legal entities and existing gold company. So let's say you do next, you specify a name here. Herein you will get the same list of entities. Again this thing works at the entity level. I'm going to select customer. The reason I'm selecting customer is because it will give you a good flavor of things like party and postal addresses, but you can do this with any entity you want. Okay. Now here on the left side you will specify your source company. or your gold company, I'm choosing USMF, which is nothing but US company. Then on the target side, I'm choosing CNMF and JPMF. This is basically Contoso China and Contoso Japan. Now what I want to do is I want to do a comparison between US company and Chinese company, and US company and Japanese company. I want to compare the list of customers and see if I can move them between companies. Do next. You can obviously run this in batch or without batch. Now I'll wait for the results to come up. It says 36 records were there in USMF, 39 records in Chinese company, and 5 records in Japanese company. So let's look at the numbers. You can go into comparison results. Okay, so it's showing me 2 rows, USMF versus CNMF. There are 30 records which are only in source, 33 records only in target, 2 identical, 4 different numbers. But let's talk about what they mean. So when you say only in source, it's saying there are 30 customer records which only exist in USMF company, which do not exist in Chinese company. Okay, there are 33 records which exist in Chinese company, but they do not exist in US company. Then there are 2 records that are exactly identical. Those customers exist in both companies, and all the attributes on the customer match. Name matches, addresses matches, cust group match, everything is a complete match. Then there are 4 records which exist in both companies. Their account numbers match, but there are few columns which are different. Okay. Yeah. So let's quickly look into the details. So this is the records which only exist in the source company. Okay. These are the records which only exist in the target company. These are the records which are exactly identical, and these are the records which are different. Okay. For the different record, we went to the extent to show you the columns which are different. So if you look at this grid, it's showing you the source column, then the target column. So if you look at the second record, the line of business in source company is 1000, and in the target company it is blank. Now imagine the power of comparing parameters and other things, other entities, to see how different your legal entities are. Okay. In the back end, it uses SQL table def. It would perform very well even your volume. So we are not doing manual comparisons or unions. It's an extremely optimized algorithm in the back end. Okay. But obviously you do not get to see the technical things behind it. But getting the numbers is easy. Telling you what is different, what is same is quite easy. Now really what you would do, I have these records in my gold company, I want this in my target company. So let me select that. Okay, these records are in my target company now, but now I want to move them to my gold company. Let me select those. Okay, now these different records, I don't want them to be different. I want to make sure target company is exactly same as source company. Let me select all of them. And what I need to just do is press this update button. I'll do all the magic of kind of pushing the data between companies, updating them, doing insert or update. So I mean, usually people used to ask for copy company, but we wanted to do slightly more than that. Okay, we wanted to be intelligent enough to identify what you want to copy, what you want to merge. Okay. Now just to prove this, whether this worked, you can rerun this thing. Going to quickly do another run to show you the numbers. I'm choosing the same companies, so nothing different, but the numbers would look little different now. There shouldn't be anything different if it works. Okay, let's go to the results. Okay, now hold on. Not sure if I take everything in the different, but if you see the number of identical records increased. Okay, and earlier the number here was 33 or 35, that changed. Okay, it's extremely powerful. Similar to this, we have copy entity data between companies. Now if you do not want to compare and you want to blindly copy, you can also do that. So let's try this. I'm going to copy something very simple, like barcode setup data. The type of barcodes we support. I'm going to copy again from my favorite company, US to Chinese and Japan. Okay. In this case, it basically copied that barcode data from USMF to multiple companies. Okay. So again, one of the things to kind of be careful here is it does not work at the table level. Okay, it works at the entity level. It'll work with all the entities we have. It'll work with all the new entities you create. Okay. Now you can do this with system configuration entities. You can do this with functional parameters. You can do import. You can do export. You can move this across AX environments. The scenarios are endless. There are ways. There are tricks to do it across AX environments. So let me give you a really high level idea. So what we did right now is within one AX instance. If you want to do cross AX instance, you can always do the load to staging table, the export, and then you can use the staging table as a source for another AX instance. You can connect through ODBC and pull the data in. Okay. So is you guys how you implement it, whether you do it with file or whether you do it with ODBC, there are multiple ways to kind of achieve those things. Okay. Now I'm going to quickly open for questions, though I'm just on time. But I just want to tell there is a lab today in the evening, where we have similar scenarios which you can try. Okay, I'm going to take questions for 5 minutes and then I'm going to move out and take questions. So go ahead. So the guys who want to talk about questions, can you guys stand on the mic so that we get that recorded as well? Yeah. So let me quickly talk about the one-to-many scenario. So at the entity level, let's take an example of customer. Customer have multiple addresses. So what do? For the customer entity, we import the primary address. Then we have another entity called customer addresses, wherein you can have multiple addresses related to customer. Now the key to that is in the customer address entity, your customer information would not repeat, your customer natural key would repeat. Okay, that's the way how you would have to design your entities as well. Okay, yep.
The compare and copy you just shown, is that CU7 as well or only R3?
So most of the features I demoed today are available in the CU7 release we did, because that's almost few months back we did, and that version works on R2 as well. So you do not have to be on CU7.
Okay.
Okay. If you guys want details, it's mentioned on the SA blog, how you can get a version which can even run with R2 with those features. You'll have to get there.
The wizard to create new entities, does it also support an update? For example, you create new tables and then you add fields later, like the AF?
Okay. So I'll kind of say, what you're saying is, one, you want to create new entities, you can do it. Any entity which we ship out of the box has nothing specific. It's as good as you guys could. Okay. Now, second thing is very common scenario, where you have cust table and you have bunch of custom fields. What do? Do you create the entity from scratch or do you modify the existing entity? So there is a very easy way to modify an existing entity. If you just copy those fields to staging table and you regenerate the mapping, it would just work out of the box. You do not have to, code for it.
Okay. Second question, the last thing about the update that you showed us, update of fields, does it take into account the table validations?
So for table validations, what happens is out of the box, we have made those things configurable. Remember, I showed you a way to manually validate data. Okay, that is one way. In the target mapping, there is a way to turn the validations at the field level or at the record level on or off. Okay. So what we realize is, we cannot assume like our existing features like AIF that you validate everything or you validate nothing. We wanted to let you guys decide depending upon your entity what fields you want to turn on and off.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Hi, is loading journals something that's one of the out of the box entities?
Yeah, we have ledger journals, we have inventory journals. They are out of the box entities. We have even asset and all those things.
Okay.
Hi. So the question is, the entity is based on the query, as you said, right? And if the main table, the parent table, doesn't have an alternate key, how do we manage that? Or similar, yeah.
Okay. So one of the things I would emphasize, the framework does not use artificial keys. The framework doesn't know what is refrec ID, by the way. It's completely on natural keys. Now, if we could do it with 180 entities and things like customer, vendor, product, believe me, you can do it with anything. Okay. There are situations, where you would have to, either identify a key or you would have to have an indirect link between your staging and target. There are known patterns about that. If you want, I can talk about it maybe later. But an example which, top of my mind I recall is, employee. Employee worker is a rec ID. Okay. But we use something like personal number as the natural key.
Similar to this session. Okay, I got that. And what do we do if we have a table ID, a refrec ID in the data?
So okay. So if you have, let's take an example. If you have refrec ID, so what I would say in your staging table, instead of adding refrec ID, you add the natural key which you can use to translate it to refrec ID. Take an example of party table. Party table everywhere in the application you would see party rec ID. But in our staging tables, you would see party number. You would see party name. Okay? Because we use those things to, translate it to refrec ID when you go to target. Or you can use table name. You just have to be creative. You'll find solutions for everything.
Can you map to XSD?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. Can you import in real time so that you bypass staging and you just shove it into the database?
So there is another entity called a flat table. Okay. So if you do not have any business transformations and if you do not want any code transformations, you can directly get the data. When you do get staging, it will move it to the tables.
I don't mean in the database. I'm sorry. I mean really to the entity, but we have to import like invent trans entities straight away out of the processing computers.
By the way, if I talk about invent trans, someone would shoot me. If I say you want to import directly into invent trans.
We do it.
Yeah. So the recommendation from Microsoft has been always that you can never directly insert data into transaction table.
Yeah.
You have to go through the business flow.
We bypass the layers, but yeah.
Okay. But if you want, there are UI configurations. When you load the staging, there's a flag which says execute the target step. So you can run it in one shot as well.
Okay. Yeah.
And we have a lot of customers who are using it for integrations, and they get end-to-end load done using the batch process with zero manual interventions.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Thanks, guys.
In the scenario of copying from, say, a production environment to test, we could create that processing group with all the configuration and parameter tables in it. Yeah. Can you force that to run cross-company, or do you have to run it once for each company in your system?
So the way it works in the current company. Okay. If you wanted to push it to multiple companies, you could use the compare copy without doing the change company. So let's say you run it in the current company, then you run the compare copy and you can mark 100 companies or whatever you want.
Okay.
Okay. I'll be available for questions outside the room. I need to just get out of this room.